You have got the text?
Yes, Rangana.
Okay, then read the text.
Okay, I'll read.
Yes.
Okay. Another error that has to be guarded against is also one to which our mentality is easily prone. It is to take some higher intermediate consciousness or even any kind of supernormal consciousness for the supermind. To reach supermind, it is not enough to go above the ordinary movements of the human mind. It is not enough to receive a greater light, a greater power, a greater joy, or to develop capacities of knowledge, sight, effective will that surpass the normal range of the human being. All light is not the light of the spirit, still less is all light the light of the supermind. The mind, the vital, the physical itself have lights of their own, as yet hidden, which can be very inspiring, exalting, informative, powerfully executive. A breaking out into the cosmic consciousness may also bring in an immense enlargement of the consciousness and power. An opening into the inner mind, inner vital, inner physical, any range of the subliminal consciousness can liberate an activity of abnormal or supernormal powers of knowledge, action or experience which the uninstructed mind can easily mistake for spiritual revelations, inspirations, intuitions. An opening upward into the greater ranges of the higher mental being can bring down much light and force, creating an intense activity of the intuitivized mind, and life power of an ascent into these ranges can bring a true but still incomplete light easily exposed to mixture, a light which is spiritual in its source, though it does not always remain spiritual in its active character when it comes down into the lower nature. But none of these things is the supermental light, the supramental power that can only be seen and grasped when we have reached the summits of the mental being, entered into overmind, and stand on the borders of an upper and a greater hemisphere of spiritual existence. There the ignorance, the inconscience, the original black nescence, slowly awaking towards a half knowledge, which are the basis of the material nature and which surround, penetrate, and powerfully limit all our powers of mind and life, sees altogether for an unmixed and unmodified truth consciousness is there the substance of all the being, its pure spiritual texture. To imagine that we have reached such a condition when we are still moving in the dynamics of the ignorance, though it may be an enlightened or illumined ignorance, is to lay ourselves open either to a disastrous misleading or to an arrest of the evolution of the being. For if it is some inferior state that we thus mistake for the supermind, it lays us open to all the dangers we have seen to attain a presumptuous egoistic haste in our demand for achievement. If it is one of the higher states that we presume to be the highest, we may, though we achieve much, yet fall short of the greater, more perfect goal of our being. For we shall remain contained with an approximation, and the supreme transformation will escape us. Even the achievement of a complete inner liberation and a higher spiritual consciousness is not that supreme transformation. For we may have that achievement, a status perfect in itself, in essence, and still our dynamic parts may in their instrumentation belong to an enlightened spiritualized mind, and may be in consequence, like all mind, defective even in its greater power and knowledge, still subject to a partial or local obscuration or a limitation by the original circumscribing innocence.
Yeah. So, quite a big para. But basically what he is saying is that supermind is very, 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 very far away. It is not easy. And compared to our ignorance, when you get even one spark of light, we think that it is fantastic what has happened. No doubt it is fantastic, but it's not the supermind. The supermind is, even when you go into the spiritual planes of consciousness, okay, it is far above the spiritual planes of consciousness. From higher mind, you have to go to illumined mind, and from illumined mind you go to intuitive mind, and finally overmind. And even the overmind is not the supermind. And that's exactly what happened to Sri Ranga when he got the overmind consciousness in 1926. He realized that the supermind is still far away. So, to hasten the descent of the supermind into himself, he withdrew from contact with everybody except mother, and he was not meeting anybody. He made a few exceptions. Okay? So he made one exception for a Frenchman who had come, because India in 1950, the French government sent some people to negotiate with the Pondicherry government and all. So he met that Frenchman, and he also met Surendramohan Ghosh. Surendramohan Ghosh was the member of parliament, and he was a devotee of Surendra. So whenever he used to come to Pondicherry, Surendra used to meet him. Otherwise, he was meeting nobody, only contact with letters. Okay? So, it's a big para, but basically what he's saying is that don't mistake the supermind. It cannot be done very easily. It's a very, very far off thing. So, I'll do one thing. I'll read the summary, and if it is clear, we can go on to the next chapter. But if you want to go through each line, I'm willing. You have to decide. Okay? So I am now reading the summary of what he has said in this. Okay? So, the first error commonly made is to think that the supermind, the supermental, can be an immediate goal. This error has to be avoided at all costs. The second error is to take any spiritual level to be supermind, however convincing and satisfying it can be. The supermind cannot be reached by just going into the higher mind, which is the lowest of the ideal planes, level 2. The supermind can only come into the range of possibility after the overmind, which is the highest of the spiritual planes, is not only reached but permanently stabilized there. After that only you can go to the supermind. That's what he said. He's warning you. Okay. So, would you like to go through each sentence, or this is enough for us? Acharya, what do you say? Jishnu, you have to decide. One of you decide, and then we'll...
Ranga, we can go
Ranga,
through.
we can go through.
We can go through? Okay.
Yeah.
So, I am reading each sentence and you see whether it is clear. Another error that has to be guarded against is also one to which our mentality is easily prone. As I said, even a small amount of light coming into the mind can be so dazzling that you think it is the highest. Okay? That's what he is warning you against. It is to take some higher intermediate consciousness or even any kind of supernormal consciousness for the supermind. To reach supermind, it is not easy, it is not enough to go above the ordinary movements of the human mind. The ordinary movements of the human mind are related to our normal reasoning mind. The maximum way our normal mind can go is for logic, pure mind. It is logical. But logic is not the spiritual plane of consciousness. To go to the spiritual planes of consciousness, you have to make your mind silent. And then you can go to the lowest level is the higher mind. And from the higher mind onwards, these 4 levels are there. And after the 4 levels only, you come to the supermind. Okay. So Ranga was having glimpses of the supermind, but the achieving of the supermind, constantly living in the supermind, even Ranga did not accomplish. He was in touch with it. There is a very interesting letter to Niruddha, I think. Okay. So, I am in contact with the supermind, he said, and Niruddha asked him, and when Niruddha asked him questions, Ranga clarified that he was in contact with the supermind, but he had not achieved the supermind. He said, I have caught the tail of the supermind and I am pulling it down. So, he could joke even about the supermind. He can't do that. Okay? So supermind, to reach supermind is not enough to go above the ordinary movements of human mind. It is not enough to receive a greater life, a greater power, a greater joy, or to develop capacities of knowledge, sight, effective will that surpass the normal range of the human being. First of all, knowledge. Knowledge is the paravidya, not the aparavidya, the higher knowledge. That means knowledge of the spiritual planes of consciousness. The essential knowledge, not knowledge of physical things. Science is knowledge of physical things. It is aparavidya. But the higher vidya is spiritual, which cannot be put into words. When you put into words, it becomes a little diminished in value. So entire what's written all 40 volumes, 40 or 45 volumes, is all expressions of spiritual knowledge. But the expression always limits and diminishes the value. Mother goes on saying that again and again in her talks with others. The subject mainly in the agenda. Okay, so all light is not the light of the spirit. That's what somebody said. Stillness is all light, the light of the supermind. The mind, the vital, the physical itself have lives of their own. The physical, if you go into the subtle physical, you have a lot of experiences. So that is not this supermental life. The vital also. The vital can be very, very dazzling. It can take you and give you all sorts of experiences. Okay? But it is very risky also. There was a gentleman here, and his name was Orunda. He used to be a lifeguard in tennis ground for swimmers who used to go to the sea. And he had many experiences in the inner vital. Okay? But the inner vital can be very dangerous because the asuric forces can mislead you. So when he told mother that I am having these experiences, mother stopped those experiences for him. And he was very regretful. He thought that mother had taken away experiences, but actually she was protecting him. She was protecting him from wrong ideas. So that's why he's being warned. All the mental, when you go into the subtle mental, what is called the inner mental, you can have all sorts of experiences. Or even if you go to the higher mind level, there will be broad illumination. You will get a lot of knowledge. But that is not supermind. Okay? The mind, the vital and the physical itself have lights of their own, as yet hidden, which can be very inspiring, exalting, informative, powerfully executed. Not each words. It can inspire you to go to higher heights. It can exalt you. You can even become quite different in character, what you are. Informative. You will get a lot of knowledge. Powerfully executive. You can do things with those lights which you normally cannot do. Okay, powerfully executive. One very interesting example is our Sai Baba of Puttaparthi. Not the Sai Baba of Shirdi, Sai Baba of Puttaparthi. He could materialize things. So, That is not spiritual consciousness at all. In fact, he knew that. Okay? He knew very well. People think that he was a fraud, but he was not a fraud. But he was very limited. He had only access to the vital worlds. And when you have access to vital worlds, you can materialize things. Even in Pondicherry also, there was that Muslim fakir who was materializing stones in guest house. Remember that incident? So he was not at all a spiritual man. So this is powerfully executed. You can have all sorts of powers for these things, but they are very far away from not only the supermind, but even the spiritual consciousness. It is not. I read the next sentence. A breaking out into the cosmic consciousness may also bring in an immense enlargement of the consciousness and power. An opening into the inner mind, inner vital, inner physical, any range of the subliminal consciousness can liberate an activity of abnormal or supernormal powers of knowledge, action, experience, which the uninstructed mind can easily mistake for spiritual revelations, inspirations, intuitions. So, he has used the word inner mind, inner vital, inner physical. So, maybe we can just expand a little on it. There are two ways you can go beyond your normal consciousness. One is to go inwards, horizontally, and the other is to go upwards, spiritually. Okay? When you go upwards spiritually, your consciousness rises and goes to higher heights. Okay? It is like in a skyscraper with a lot of ground, in gardens all around, you have to go up. Okay? You climb up, and then as you keep climbing up, your view of the whole town becomes very superior. So you get a lot of more knowledge and you understand much more. But if you go into yourself, okay, it's like the house which has got a kitchen garden at the back. Okay. Now, what's the difference? Normally we are sitting in the front room, but if you go into your house and go into the kitchen garden at the back, one very striking difference is that it is open to the sky. And if it is open to the sky, then you are in the universe. So you have to, when you go there, that's inner vital, inner physical, and inner mind. You get a lot of knowledge. You are open to the sky means you are open to the knowledge of the universe. So that is not a spiritual consciousness. Okay? And if you go even beyond the inner mind, inner vital, inner body, you will come to the psychic being. The psychic being is deep inside. The first layer is your physical body, the vital and the mind. The external part, which you normally have. That's the first layer. If you go inside, the second layer is the inner mind, inner vital, and the inner physical. Okay, you can also call them the subtle physical. Then third level, you go deeper into yourself. That's a psychic being. It's deep inside you. So that's the inner mind, inner vital. But if you go above, it is not inner, you get spiritual knowledge. Okay? So when you go into your intraconscious, but inner, it's also called the intraconscious. Okay? So you can get a lot of experiences, but that exactly is not even spiritual. It is a lot of knowledge you will get. Powers also you can get, but that's not spiritual. Spiritually you have to go up. Okay? That's why Ranga speaks about a triple transformation. First is the psychic transformation, which purifies your outer nature. It purifies the vital, even the body it purifies. And it purifies the vital in the mind. And then you can go to the spiritual transformation that is going upwards. And finally the supermental transformation. Okay? So I just explained the inner, what is meaning by inner. Okay? And opening into the inner mind, inner vital, inner physical, any range of the subliminal consciousness, He calls this subliminal consciousness. I gave you an image to make it clear as to what the subliminal consciousness is. It is a going inwards into your house, okay, and you are in touch with the universe. That's a subliminal consciousness. Can liberate an activity of abnormal and supernormal powers of action and experience, which in uninstructed mind, those who don't have knowledge, can easily mistake as spiritual revelations, inspirations, intuitions. And opening upward, now that's the difference. One is opening inwards and the opening upwards. That's the spiritual. And opening upwards into the greater ranges of the higher mental being. So if they use the word higher mental being, he means the higher mind. Okay? Can bring down much light and force, creating an intense activity of the intuitive mind, intuitivized mind, and life power of an ascent into these ranges, can bring a true but still incomplete life easily exposed to mixture. Okay? So, higher mind, eleven mind, even the intuitive mind, there can be mixture of wrong ideas and wrong knowledge. A light which is spiritual in its source, though it does not always remain spiritual in its active character. Active character means in the physical body, vital and mind. When it comes down, it need not remain spiritual anymore. You can misinterpret it. That's the whole problem. In its active character, when it comes down into the lower nature. But none of these things in the supramental life, the supramental power, that can only be seen and grasped when we have reached the summits of our mental being, enter the overmind, and stand on the borders of an upper, greater hemisphere of spiritual existence. So above the overmind. And before you go to the overmind, the other three planes, higher mind, eleven mind, intuitive mind. Okay. There, at that level, the ignorance, the inconscience, the original dark nations slowly awakening towards the half knowledge, which are the basis of material nature and which surround, penetrate and powerfully limit all our powers of mind and life, cease altogether. So when you go to the above the overmind, all the lower planes of consciousness, they cease. You are no more in ignorance. There can be mixture in these spiritual planes of consciousness of knowledge and lack of knowledge, ignorance. But in the spiritual, in the supermind, there is no ignorance at all. For an unmixed and unmodified truth consciousness is there, the substance of all the being, its pure spiritual texture. Note the word substance, huh? It's also a substance. But the substance is absolutely pure, transparent, one. To imagine that we have reached such a condition that we are still moving in the dynamics of the ignorance, though it may be an enlightened element ignorance. Enlightened ignorance is a spiritual plane of consciousness. Or illumined ignorance. Sometimes you get a flash of knowledge at the lower levels. Our normal condition is mixture of knowledge and ignorance. We have knowledge. Science has discovered a lot of things. Okay? So knowledge is there, but it is very, very limited. To imagine that we have reached a condition where we are still moving in the dynamics of the ignorance, note the word dynamics. Huh? That means there is movement. But in the supramental plane, or even the spiritual planes, there is no dynamism. There is absolute static condition. Dynamism implies movement. But in the spiritual planes of consciousness, no movement at all. It is static. Okay? Though it may be an enlarged or illumined ignorance, is to lay ourselves open either to a disastrous misleading. Then you become a Bhrashta yogi, you fall down. Is to lay ourselves open either to a disastrous misleading or to an arrest of the evolution of the being. Your progress will be stopped. That's what it means, arrest of the evolution of the being. For if it is some inferior state that let us mistake for the supermind, it lays us open to all the dangers we have seen to attend a presumptuous egoistic haste in our demand for achievement. Impatience is one of the worst things that one can have in spiritual life. You must have tremendous patience. So impatience, you will be egoistic haste, everything. Okay? Presumptuous, you got wrong ideas. So you must never be in a hurry in spiritual life. If it is one of the higher states that we presume to be the highest, we may, though we achieve much, yet fall short of the greater, more perfect goal of our being. That's why in the synthesis, sometimes he uses the word supermind, but all the time when he is using supermind, it is not the supermind. It is the supra-mind, above the spiritual planes of consciousness. Because he wrote these things in 1910, up to 1910, Arya. But later on he got the overmind experience in 1926. So he has explained in one letter, okay, that he realized that the supermind was even above the overmind. Even the achievement of a complete inner liberation.
Supermind and supramind, what is the difference? I don't know about that. Supermind and supramind. Just now you said no, supramind and supermind.
The word is not important. What I'm saying is that in synthesis, okay, sometimes he uses the word supermind, meaning the spiritual planes of consciousness. Supermind, above the mind. That's what I meant. When you're reading synthesis, you have to be very, very careful as to what exactly he is saying. Okay. So, I'm reading the last sentence. Even the achievement of a complete inner liberation and a high spiritual consciousness is not that supreme transformation. Because if you have an inner complete liberation and a high spiritual consciousness, you do not have full power to change your nature. Your body-mind life may continue with its old habits, and those who are watching you, they may not realize that you are living at a very high level of consciousness because you are doing very ordinary things. Okay? So people will not recognize. The old habits can still persist when you are in a spiritual consciousness. Okay? That's the thing. Even the achievement of a complete inner liberation and a high spiritual consciousness is not that supreme transformation. When they are saying supreme transformation, it means even the body will be changed. Okay? That's the supermative. For we may have that achievement, a status, perfect in itself, in essence, and still our dynamic parts. Which are the dynamic parts? The body-mind life. Okay? The dynamic parts may, in their instrumentation, belong to an enlightened spiritual mind and may be, in consequence, like all mind, defective, even in its greater power and knowledge. Still, subject to a partial or local obscuration or a limitation by an original subscribing nations. Subscribing, limiting you. To circumscribe is to surround you with a limit, a circle which surrounds you, and with the nations. Nations is the ignorance, the lack of light. Okay, so that's what I'm saying. So that completes the chapter. And the next chapter is the part 2, the yoga of integral knowledge. So all now we have not been doing knowledge, we have been doing karma yoga. Now he comes to jnana yoga. And bhakti yoga is a very small portion at the last. And then he goes to the integral yoga. So now we are entering the second part of the book, the jnana yoga part, as applied in integral yoga. Okay? So we have got 8 minutes, and so we can read the first paragraph of this book. So anyone can read. Who will read? Jishnu, would you like to read?
Yes, Ranga, I will read.
Okay.
Can you hear me clearly?
Yeah. Okay.
Perfect.
Beginning from the object of knowledge. What is meant by spiritual knowledge?
Chapter 1.
Yeah, that's
Object of knowledge. All spiritual seeking moves towards an object of knowledge to which men ordinarily do not turn the eye of the mind. To someone or something, eternal, infinite, absolute, that is not the temporal things or forces of which we are sensible, although he or it may be in them or behind them or their source or creator. It aims at a state of knowledge by which we can touch, enter, or know by identity this eternal, infinite, and absolute. A consciousness other than our ordinary consciousness of ideas and forms and things. A knowledge that is not what we call knowledge, but something self-existent, everlasting, infinite. And although it may be, even necessarily must, since man is a mental creature, start from our ordinary instruments of knowledge, yet it must as necessarily go beyond them and use suprasensuous and supramental means and faculties. For it is in search of something that is itself suprasensuous and supramental, beyond the grasp of the mind and senses. Even if through mind and sense there can come a first glimpse of it or a reflected image.
So he is describing to us what is spiritual knowledge. There is ordinary knowledge, aparavidya, and there is spiritual knowledge. Spiritual knowledge, scientific knowledge and practical knowledge is available to us through the senses. When we are using our senses and the mind, okay, that is the instruments given to us for knowing the physical world. But the spiritual world, you have to use your subtle senses. You have to go beyond. You have to use sight. Spiritual sight and subtle senses. That's the difference. Okay? So he's saying very clearly. So we have 5 minutes. I'll go through each sentence and we see whether it is clear. All spiritual seeking moves towards the object of knowledge to which men ordinarily do not turn the eye of the mind. Object of knowledge is something beyond our normal physical world. To someone or something, okay? To someone, then you are thinking of God as a person. Or something, you are thinking of God as impersonal. The nirguna, okay? Not the saguna. Something eternal, infinite, absolute. There are many, many spiritual leaders who go right up to the self and to say that there is no God. There is only a state of consciousness which is perfect. So that's what we mean by impersonal. Nobody is there, but you feel yourself to be in a great freedom. You have tremendous amount of knowledge. You have also power. So all these are the nirguna Brahman, the impersonal Brahman, not the personal Brahman. That's why Srila is saying to someone or something. Someone is the personal. You may want to achieve. For us, it is all very often we are only thinking of mother and Swayambhu, and that's the personal aspect. Okay, you can go through both the things. When you do Jnana Yoga, It is not, normally it is not the personal aspect, it is the impersonal aspect. So, something eternal, infinite, absolute. That is not the temporal things or forces of which we are sensible. All apara vidya, lower knowledge, is temporal. Temporal things means transient things. Things of the physical world. Okay. The knowledge of the spiritual planes is not temporal at all. It is outside time and space, and that's why it is immutable. The self is immutable. There is no change at all. It is static. Okay. We are sensible, although he or it. Okay. So again, he is stressing that person and the impersonal. He or it may be in them, or behind them, or the source of creating. It aims at it. It is what? Spiritual seeking. The spiritual seeking aims at a state of knowledge by which we can touch, enter, or know by identity this eternal, infinite, and absolute. So Srindos, this is typical. He always puts either 3 adjectives or 3 verbs very often to cover the whole range, beginning from the lowest to the highest. So here he is saying we can touch. Okay. First is you can get a touch for 1 second, 2 seconds. It can certainly eliminate you and stop. But you can also enter into it. Okay. Entering is different from touching. You have much more knowledge. Or the last one is by identity. You become the divine, or you become what you want to know, whether it be peace, or power, or sense of infinity, or knowledge. Okay. You can know by identity. All these 3 things are possible. This eternal, infinite and absolute, he is repeating several times. Eternal, infinite and absolute. If you have knowledge of the eternal, infinite and absolute, it is spiritual knowledge. Not ordinary knowledge, not lower knowledge. A consciousness other than our ordinary consciousness of ideas and forms and things. Note the word forms. When you are seeing forms only separately, then you are in ignorance. Because all forms, behind them is a formless unity, which you don't see if you are in ignorance. Okay. Ideas and forms and things. And knowledge that is not what we call knowledge, but something self-existent, everlasting, infinite. So, spiritual truth is self-existent. It doesn't need senses to know. You come to know it without senses. It exists by itself. Everlasting, eternal, infinite. Okay? And although it may or even necessarily must, since man is a mental creature, start from our ordinary instruments of knowledge. The ordinary instruments of knowledge are the senses, eyes, ears, nose, touch and smell. Okay? These are the instruments of knowledge, and with the mind. The mind is essential. Okay? Then these are the instruments of knowledge. Yet, it must necessarily go beyond them and use suprasensuous or supramental means and faculties. So very clearly here, supramental does not mean the supramental plane or gnosis, what he calls. Supramental. You go beyond the mental and you enter into the spiritual planes of consciousness. Suprasensuous, going beyond the senses. Supramental, going beyond the mind. Okay? Very clearly he is saying that. You can't judge. You can't jump from the sensuous to the supramental. You jump from the sensuous to the mental, the spiritual mental. That's what it means by supramental. Means and faculties. For it is in search of something that is in itself supra-sensuous, beyond the senses, and supramental, beyond the grasp of the mind and senses. See, he has defined you also. What is supramental here? Okay? So you must not mistake the word supramental here for the gnosis. That's why he uses 2 other words for supramental. He uses the word gnosis. Gnosis. That is absolutely clear. He means the supramental, supermind. Or he also uses the word truth consciousness. When he uses the word truth consciousness, he means the supramental. But here very clearly it is not. It's only above the senses and above the mind. See, very clearly he has put. Beyond the grasp of the mind and senses. So when you go to the higher mind, you are in the spiritual planes of consciousness, and that is you start getting the higher vidya, para-vidya. Okay? Beyond the grasp of the mind and senses, even if through mind and sense, there can come the first glimpse of it or a reflective image. So the first glimpse, he has used the word touch earlier. No? So that first glimpse can only be a touch or a reflected image. Okay. We've gone 2 minutes beyond our time, so we'll stop here today. Next time, we'll take up the traditional systems. Okay? So, we spoke about the supermental, and immediately we got an example in the first para itself of what he's saying. Okay? So, we stop here today. Au revoir, everybody, and have a nice day.
Thank you, Ranga.
Thank you, Ranga.
Thank you.